Hello, everybody. Let me welcome you to the fifth in our 18th lecture series, community lecture series. I think it's been a very exciting one. This, you remember, is our last individual lecture, and then next week we have all of our lectures together in a panel discussion with the usual questions and answers afterwards. So that will be led by Professor Kinch, Ashby Kinch. Put your hand up there. He's going to be our fearless leader for next week. As usual, I'll need to remind you to turn off your phones if you haven't done that yet. And then I have some extra, first of all, someone left this notebook out on the table, out in the front. Is that anybody? Oh, Andy. There you go. Okay, so we've taken care of that. All right, I have a series of announcements, a short list of announcements here to make, and so I'm going to consult my notes so I don't forget them. Next week, we're going to be back here for our panel discussion, as I said, and then, as usual, at the end of the panel discussion and after some questions and answers, we'll be moving off to our usual wine and cheese. I guess it'll be wine and cheese. I don't know what else humanists ever have except wine and cheese. That's very humanities-like, isn't it? I have heard that sociologists drink gin out of trash cans, but I'm not sure that's the case. If you're a sociologist and that's what you want to drink, just you have to bring your own drinks, I'm pretty sure. Okay, so we will have our usual place, our usual event here, and then move on down the hall to that next event where all of our lecturers will be present. You'll get a chance to say hello and thank them for their contributions. DVDs are going to be available for purchase, DVDs of the entire series after the MCAT series is over. The MCAT series broadcast is over. And let's see, the rebroadcast dates end on May the 21st, so they should be available after that. I think Angela asked that you sign up for those. Is that right, Angela? After this event, so that we'll know how many people will be interested. The series is going to be broadcast on MCAT channel 189 beginning Tuesday, April 22nd at 6 p.m. and repeating the following Saturday at 8:30 p.m. It will run for 6 weeks. And scheduled copies are available here on the table and probably out on the front table as well. So pick those up as you leave. And then we'd like to hear what else you would like to hear about, what else you would like to have lecturers talk to you about in the coming years. And we will have a survey available next week, and you'll be able to pick that up and then return it to us with your comments. And we do look at those and consider those as we of the advising committee get together to try to decide what to do in the following year. So don't think we just throw them in the round file or anything like that. We really do look at them because we get excellent suggestions from you many times. So thanks a lot for that. My real joy today is to introduce Professor Jillian Campana. And I have only tonight laid eyes on Jillian. I have to tell you that, but her reputation precedes her. For the past several years, floating around in various committees and in various connections on campus, I've been hearing of the wonderful work that Jillian is doing over in the School of Visual and Performing Arts. Now, I will point out that most of the lecturers, the other lecturers in this group, come from the College of Humanities and Sciences, and you may think that that's where the usual humanist finds his or her home, and you'll see that a lot of wonderful humanists do lodge there in the College of Humanities and Sciences. But last year, we began to work on a proposal for a humanities institute here at the University of Montana, and that's currently in the approval process. We hope that will be finished soon, and I think Ashby will talk a little bit more about that next week, correct? And so we began to try to define whom we wanted to include, or how we wanted to include people, or how we wanted to define ourselves for purposes of the Humanities Institute. And what we realized very quickly is that there is a lot of work which is humanities work, that is, and we're talking about it in this lecture, work at understanding ourselves, helping us understand ourselves, that is being done in parts of the university which are not in humanities programs at all, and certainly not even in the College of Humanities and Sciences. And I'm really pleased to introduce to you Jillian tonight, because I think you'll become aware, if you're not aware of the nature of her work, that her work is visual and performing arts, but it's also a humanistic discipline as she does it. And I'm really excited about the crossing of those boundaries by Jillian. It's exciting to see how many places around the world she's gone and worked, and how many people she's been able to help with her performing art, and also with this humanistic take that she has on it. So Jillian, without further ado, come on over and chat with us.
Can you all hear me okay? Great. You just stole my first 5 minutes of my presentation. It was all about that, but I'm going to do it anyway, if this appears. Thank you so much. It really was a privilege to be invited, especially because it is focusing on the humanities, and there are so many incredible professors in that work in the humanities. And of course, I'm in theater. I'm in visual and performing arts, and theater is my discipline. And within the area of theater, my focus is many things, but acting. I teach acting. And so I wanted to start off by just thinking about theater as an art form. It is an art form in and of itself, and then it also draws upon many different art forms. We have music very often in productions, and if we don't have music, we have some oral or sound component to it. Very often we have dance or movement. We have the visual arts are in theater, in the scenic design and in the costume design. And I would say more and more often now you'll see a video component in theater. That's very common. So it really is pulling all of the art forms together. I like to say that theater pulls all of them together. But it's also a humanities, because the goal of any theater production or drama experience is to present humanity to humanity, so that the people who are involved, both as the performers and as the spectators, think about themselves, think about the world that they inhabit, think about other people and other worlds that they're not inhabiting, that might coexist in this time frame, but also might be 500 years ago. And so I'd like to start by just showing you a series of images from some recent productions that we have from Theater and Dance. And as you look at these images, they're still, but I'd like you to maybe imagine what might have led up to that, what movement might have come before or after, what oral components might be existing simultaneously. So the art form, but I'd also like you to think about the characters and the stories that you see. The first one is from a play, Angels in America, Tony Kushner's play, and this is the character Prior. He is fantasizing about another life that he could be having, when in reality he's dealing with the fact that his partner has just been told that Prior has been diagnosed with AIDS, and his partner is planning on leaving him. But we have this incredible display of light in this photo, and of course the actor, his use of the body and the mirror. That's a scenic design, the mirror in the background, so we sort of see both sides of this character. This is from the most recent production here at Hot and Throbbing, and it's all about domestic violence. So it's a painful, really difficult show to watch, but our goal was to also make it aesthetically pleasing so that audiences had to watch. And so if you just take a look at the light and the shape, and of course the facial expressions in these characters, the color, the contrast. This is a production from a couple of years ago, actually a play that I wrote called Jumping into Fire. And I love the shape that we have and the light in the background. But if we look at the characters' faces, even though one of them is cut off, trust me, it's brilliant. They're all intensely gazing at one thing, except the woman in the center is sort of looking somewhere else. And this is a story about family obligation and discipline, but it also needed to be beautiful to look at. A couple more. This is from a play a couple years ago, not Uncle Vanya, Chekhov's Cherry Orchard. And I love the costumes in this. The feathers are incredible. The contrast in the blue and the pink and the gloves. But again, if we go to sort of the humanity side and we think about the story that's being told, this is a mother talking to her daughter about love. And we see the mother's face down, her gaze is down, and her daughter is gazing intently at her. So that's the story of that, but it needs to be beautiful. It needs to capture the eye or the ear or the emotion, the gut, in order for us to continue watching it. This is from Medea. Medea's in the background. This is her ex-husband, Jason, just after he's learned that Medea has killed his new wife. And so we see, I love this photo because of the anguish in his face, but also in his, you see it in his contorted upper body. And this final image is from a production several years ago called Proof, actually a Pulitzer Prize-winning drama. And you can't see in the background, but the scenic design was incredible on this one. And I just love the contrast of their faces. This is a woman telling a young guy to stay away from her baby sister. And we see his face. It's happy, it's pleased, and we see the sort of the anger and the little bit of rage going on with her. We have a School of Theater and Dance here at the University of Montana. I always have to give a plug for that because sometimes we're over there on another side of campus, and there sometimes isn't a lot of movement back and forth. We have almost 200 majors and minors. And then we have countless other students who take general education courses in our school. But sometimes, and this is happening more and more, parents or students are afraid to take a theater class. Or I would say, venture to say, an art class in general. Because there's sort of a fear, I think, out there that it's not practical. And I'm here to say I think it's one of the most practical things to study because the characteristics that are learned in this discipline are the same characteristics that employers are looking for in their employees. They're the characteristics that partners are looking for in someone they love. They're characteristics that family and friends are really looking for. So what are those characteristics? And again, I'm coming from a background of acting. So, acting promotes many abilities. I would say these are the top that really connect to any discipline. An ability to confidently articulate oneself and one's ideas. So to express identity and to feel comfortable doing that. And that is not to be overrated. And that doesn't come easily for most people. But the ability to work with other people and to collaborate, that's absolutely huge. It's hard to agree with many people. And because theater artists are working with many, many disciplines, as I mentioned, and many people in time, deadline-driven, problematic areas, they have to listen to each other or the entire thing flops. And so collaboration and working together is huge. The ability to solve problems. There's always a problem going on, whether it's a microphone not working or a costume that isn't there or someone who doesn't appear on stage when they're supposed to be there. And then there's all the other things. In Hot and Throbbing, the play that we just had, one of our big problems was blood, because there's blood on stage and we needed a blood pack, and we probably spent 10 hours in a room that could get blood all over, kind of squishing these different blood packs and seeing where the blood went and how it stayed and where it stuck. There's so many problems. And so anyone who studies theater is really going to be working in a lot of problem solving. The ability to receive and incorporate feedback. So there's always a critique involved in art forms. You put your work out there, and then someone has something to say about it. And it's a little different because it's a live interaction. So whereas if I publish a paper in a journal, there's going to be a lot of critique about it, but I'm not necessarily going to hear it all the time. And of course, in the theater, I mean, on the large scale, we have these reviews that can make or break a career, but even here at the university setting, we have talkbacks, and we have where we're talking to performers and designers about their work. So it's not just a thick skin that one needs to develop, but it's an ability to take that information and then make a change based on that information, if one deems it's valid. The ability to harness emotions, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. I think that a lot of times theater artists can come off as a little wacky. I hear that a lot, or maybe even a little emotional, or sometimes emotionally unstable. It's the sort of stereotypical version. But a proper training in something like acting actually works with actors to be able to express their emotions and the emotions of other people, which are very difficult and sometimes painful, but then to regain composure, regain self, reassume one's identity, and use those emotions and what has been gained in a performance or in a rehearsal as sort of information that then can be used in real life. And so I think that it's a wonderful tool to learn how to work with emotions and be able to feel things, but then also come back and be well-centered and well-balanced. And that's what we teach here, and I think that's what any really good program teaches. A lot of times I'll say, I think actors need to have gone to therapy and be in therapy and have someone to talk to about these feelings and know how to deal with them when problems come up. Acting develops the ability to imagine possibilities. So we're inhabiting so many different other characters and other worlds, and so our idea and our understanding of what can be possible becomes enormous. And finally, the ability to understand the perspectives of another person, which is really the focus of what we want to talk about tonight. Empathy. So empathy being the ability to understand and feel someone's emotions from their perspective. And empathy builds pro-social behaviors. It helps us build close relationships and maintain close relationships. It helps us build community. It makes other people more empathic toward us. It guides our conscience, because when we care about someone, we're more likely to have our conscience guide our actions. And it pulls people together. So whereas sympathy, of course, and empathy is a really big, really hot topic out there right now. Sympathy, feeling for someone, empathy, feeling with someone. And I'd like you to think of, let's see if we can think about 3 scenarios. I'll give you the scenario and then think about where you are on that spectrum of sympathy to empathy. So you have a close friend who's lost someone. And if you've had that experience, you probably have empathy. You know what it's like to be in that situation. But if you haven't, if you've been fortunate enough, How do you know, even if you feel for them, even if you care about them, how do you know what they're feeling or what they might be going through? This is close to my home. Your adolescent is screaming at you for absolutely no reason other than the hormones raging in their body. And though, of course, you were, because you're here, you were an adolescent at some point. It's been a long time. And you feel for them. But can you go back and really experience what that's like to be in that situation, to feel that maybe disempowered, I think is really what a lot of adolescents are reacting to. So how do you build empathy for that? And then one that might be a little more common for all of us. You have a dear friend that you're counting on and they're late again. Maybe they're always late. And they're late this time because their car broke down. And you feel for them. You know this is hard, but do you really, can you put yourself in their shoes? Can you experience their situation from their perspective? So I'd love it if we could actually, for just a minute or two, think about a moment in your recent life where you've really felt empathy for someone, where you were able to put yourself in their situation. What did it do for the relationship? Who was that person? And how did that make you feel? And then rather than just thinking about it, I'd love you to turn to someone next to you or in front of you and take a minute to share that experience with them. When did you feel empathy for someone?
The dog, yeah.
Maybe take another 30 seconds. Great. Thank you. Can you imagine? Because when we started this evening, everyone was sitting in their seat waiting for it to begin. But then there becomes this conversation, and actually body posture changed, and people turned to one another. And even if, for those of you who weren't sharing, your body posture changed, there were a lot of people who were sort of looking up, recollecting. And so be thinking, as I'm talking a little bit more about empathy, what happened to your breath or your maybe even blood pressure or your emotions, even just telling the story, going back in that moment and thinking about it. Were you able to feel a little bit more for that person. And even if you're wrong in thinking about how they might be feeling, the question of, is that a start, might be something that's interesting to think about. I'd like to show you a monologue that is, I'll pull up here. And this is a monologue that was co-written by a US Marine Corps veteran and one of my theater students in a project that we did last year where we interviewed several veterans. We were trying to understand what the experience was like for them returning home post-demobilization, and just to open up that dialogue. And so I'll pull this up. For some of you, it might be hard to see, but the goal is really not to have someone perform it, rather just to see what it's like to read a story. And I'll leave that up there for a little while. We can come back at the end if there's time. Empathy often comes more easily to us with people that we already have a relationship with, or people who are like-minded, or people who have similar experiences. And so there might be some of you who really respond to this. Maybe you've been in a similar situation. It might be easier for you to develop empathy for this person, feel what they're maybe feeling from their perspective. And for others, it might be a further removed process. There was a study by a neuroscientist named Tanya Singer, who does a lot of work with empathy. And she did a study with couples where she took one half of the couple, she put them through an MRI, scanned their brain, and while they were receiving the MRI scan, she gave them a series of painful electric shocks. And then she noticed the part of their brain that was firing. And then she took their other half and put them through the same scan and told them that their partner had received painful electric shocks. The same part of their brain lit up for that person when they were told about someone they loved experiencing that. It makes me think about this kind of hot new area in neuroscience called mirror neurons. About 20 years ago, researchers at the University of Parma in Italy discovered that they discovered the concept of mirror neurons. And then just to go back a little bit to try to explain it if you don't already know, when I perform an action, particularly a physical action like picking up a paper or jumping up or shaking someone's hand, there's some neurons in the prefrontal area of my brain that fire. But a subset of those neurons also fire in all of you when I pick up the paper or when I jump up or when I shake someone's hand. And there are other neuroscientists. V.S. Ramachandran is the person who's really sort of bringing this concept to the fore in terms of affective experience and emotion. And he's wondering if, which I completely believe, he's preaching to the choir here, if I feel something and you observe me feeling it, does the same part, a subset of neurons in your brain actually fire? And that whole concept is really, I think, interesting to think about when we think about empathy. We're reading something incredibly powerful here, but we're not hearing it or seeing it or observing it. And so are we experiencing it as fully? So I thought I'd perform a monologue, not this monologue. And maybe you can see the difference. the difference between reading something and watching someone perform it. So this is from a play that I worked with several individuals to co-write, and this character's name is Bob. Well, I just got up one morning. I went to get out of bed, fell flat on the floor. Of course, I didn't know what was going on. My mother, she lives next door, she found me. And of course, when she found me, she knew something was wrong. She called the ambulance. Oh, I had a stroke. It was a blood clot. I took this class. What was it called? Abnormal Psychology. And they talk about loss and grief and, you know, the things that can really affect a person. And they had this chart. And do you know the worst thing on that chart that can happen to a person is losing a child? Oh, it's worse than losing a partner. It's worse than losing a parent. And I've lost 2. So the stroke in my mind is nothing in comparison. So what's that like? To read something that's incredibly emotional, but also to see someone perform something. Does that change your connection to the story? Does it change your feelings or your emotions? Does it even change your level of interest? Just something to think about. Yeah, I think it does. And a lot of people, I think I've skipped several slides, which are brilliant, by the way. Mirror neurons, there we go. See, this is for me, because it keeps me on track, otherwise I don't really know what I'm saying. A lot of people are really excited about empathy. They're trying to figure out where it went and how we can get more of it. Schools are building cultures of empathy because they've discovered that when students are more empathic, there's a lot less bullying going on, test scores go up, people get more done. Couples who have empathy for each other are less likely to get separated or divorced. And hospitals, I love this next slide. It's my comedy in there. I thought I'm one of the more empathic doctors around, right? Hospitals have discovered that doctors who show that they care about the patient's well-being have patients who heal more quickly. And patients are less likely to file malpractice in the case of wrongdoing if the physician shows that they feel bad about what happened, which is very interesting. So there's this rush to build empathy. And my approach, of course, is through acting, through portraying another person. And when I think about acting, there are many, many, many skills, but the big ones that come to my mind are voice, eye contact, facial expression, body language, observation, and imagination. And so I'd love to just talk about those for a minute. So actors train their voices. Our students here take several voice and speech classes to learn how to modulate their voice. Of course, they need to speak loudly, but it's also to express emotion and to, of course, use different dialects and to really capture the essence of a character through tone and through resonance of the voice, as well as pace. So the same part of our brain that controls our fight and flight response also controls the part that has our vocal tone in it. And so actors, I think, become very aware of other people's vocal habits and aspects of their tone. They can read into it and see things that maybe a person is trying to conceal. And they also can share qualities in a very, very subtle way with an audience because they've been trained in the use of the voice. Eye contact is something that you might not think that an actor would really have to be thinking about. And of course, we don't have classes in eye contact. Eye contact 101. That might be a good gen ed, though. Eye contact is incredibly important. When an audience is watching a performer, whether it's a live performer or someone on film or television, their eyes are naturally drawn to the performer's eyes. That's where we go when we want to see something. That's one of the things I talk about with my students is when an actor wears a mask, which we don't do so much anymore, it changes everything because we don't have that eye to see anymore. And so eye contact with one another and eye contact sometimes with an audience is incredibly important for actors. They need to be able to, when they're on stage with another person, make a connection through the eyes. And of course, you know, eye contact, going back to newborn babies, the distance that a newborn can see is really the distance between the mother's breast and the mother's face. And so eyes have this incredibly nurturing aspect to them, which also connects back to empathy and the ability to use eye contact. Facial expression and body language. So I would bet that probably more than half of you have heard about the brilliant Harvard social psychologist Amy Cuddy and her power poses. She talks about how important body language is and body posture is in confidence. And actually, a lot of her ideas come from a man by the name of Paul Ekman, who is at University of California in San Francisco, and he still studies facial expressions. Actors really work intensely with facial expressions and with their body, both as a means to communicate to an audience, but also to communicate to themselves. And so if we go back and we look at Paul Ekman's work, he's discovered that there are some universal facial expressions that exist across cultures. So in other words, the expression that I might feel when I'm feeling rage is incredibly similar to the same facial expression that someone in Java might make when they feel rage. The expression that I might make when I feel sad is very similar to someone in Buenos Aires. And he discovered that when he took several groups of participants who were not feeling an emotion, and he gave them an assigned emotion, and he gave them an assigned corresponding facial expression to make. So, you know, rage or sadness. And he discovered that after a very short period of time, 1 to 2 minutes, they began to feel that emotion. And Amy Cuddy's work, of course, in the power pose is that if a person makes a pose, makes their body literally larger, takes up more space, spreads their legs, raises and lifts their arms, and she's studied the hormones, their confidence increases because their testosterone is raised and their cortisol, their stress hormone, is lowered because they feel that they're in that power posture, which, by the way, is really universal. So actors are using body language and facial expressions to communicate to themselves as well. Very often an actor's not feeling anything at all. How can you be on all the time? But if they make that corresponding expression with their face or their body, at some point they're going to feel it. So it's this kind of lovely feedback loop that goes on. Observation. Actors have themselves and everybody they watch. That's all they have to base their characters on. And so observation becomes very, very important. And imagination. Actors work to be able to safely imagine that they might be able to live through another person for a short duration of time. And so as a result, actors tend to be very empathic, not just on the stage, but in real life as well. And sometimes that can be a wonderful thing, and sometimes when they're not trained properly, it can be a really scary thing because they feel too deeply. But more often than not, they learn to harness and control those emotions, and they're able to go there. And so they can feel, but feel at a distance, which is a really lovely thing. Actors learn to relate to and identify with the characters they portray so that they can present them from that person's perspective. But here, I think, is a really important thing. They also learn to remove their judgment from judging that character. And that's what I think is really difficult for a lot of us and where a lot of people get caught up in the empathy. because we don't want to remove how we feel that person should be doing what they're doing. So for example, you saw the image, and I'll just pick on Curtis because he's here in the front row. You saw that image from Hot and Throbbing where someone's being strangled, and Curtis was playing that character, Clyde, who is the perpetrator of this horrible violent act. He's got to find a hook. He's got to figure out a way, something that he has in common, because if he chooses to maintain judgment on this character, we see it. We know that he's not really that character, and we don't have any feeling for that character, and we don't want to continue watching. So it's a really interesting technique that actors have learned, have figured out how to work with. And I like to, in the last 15, 20 minutes, try to figure out what that is. You probably heard the saying, never judge a man until you've walked a mile in his moccasins. That's actually from a poem by Mary Lathrop in 1895. Don't be too harsh with the man that sins, or pelt him with words or stone or disdain, unless you are sure you have no sins of your own, and it's only wisdom and love that your heart contains. For if you know the tempter's voice should whisper as soft to you as it did to him when he went astray, it might cause you to falter too. Just walk a mile in his moccasins before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. If for just 1 hour you could find a way to see through his eyes instead of your own muse. I want to talk about 2 different experiences that I've had here at the university. The first one comes from a play that we did 13 years ago called The Laramie Project, which you might have heard of. The Laramie Project tells the story of the response the community, Laramie, Wyoming, had to the murder of a young gay University of Wyoming student who was murdered, tortured and murdered, because he was gay. And members of a theater troupe in New York, the Tectonic Theater Project, descended upon Laramie and interviewed many, many residents. They interviewed people who were connected to the individuals involved. They interviewed people who were not connected, who didn't care. They interviewed the family of Matthew Shepard. They interviewed friends and even of the killers and even one of the killers. And I was really interested to see when we did this production what it did for the actors. I knew the audience might be affected, but I wondered if the very act of performing in a play would in some way cause the actors to think very differently. And of course, it's easy to think, well, why would they even have any thought that was not open-minded? We've come a long way in 13 years, I'll tell you that. At the beginning of the process, and there were 10 actors in the play, and 9 of them identified as being straight at that time. 1 was gay. But all of them used the words when they wrote. I had them keep a journal, and I asked them open-ended questions every single week in order to determine how they might be changing in their thought as a result of being in this production. At the beginning, all of their journal entries talked about they and them and the people of Laramie. They saw it as a very distant thing that had happened. But as we progressed through rehearsal, they started using words like we and us and our. They began to see it as a much bigger problem and something that they owned. And I only included 2 quotes, but these 2 really stand out to me. This is at the very end of the process from someone who felt at the beginning very comfortable with the idea that the play promotes a message of tolerance. It's good that we're doing this play, but didn't really plan on doing anything afterwards. And he said, if we aren't doing something to stop bigotry, then we're contributing to it. So it leads me to believe that the production and portraying some of these people moved him closer toward understanding the issue and seeing it from someone else's perspective. And the other quote is from a guy who played a really, really difficult character, Fred Phelps, who's with the Westboro Baptist Church and still goes around spewing hatred and bigotry. And he played that character. And he said, playing people I didn't like, actually saying words that condone prejudice and hate was very difficult. But it asked me to think about what prejudice I tolerate. Another production is a play that we did about probably 10 years ago here called The Puzzle Club. That monologue that I performed earlier is from The Puzzle Club. And this was a production. I worked with a group of individuals who were living with traumatic or acquired brain injuries in Missoula, and I interviewed them for several months, and together we ended up writing a play. And the play used only their real words because I recorded everything. And then I cast actors in the roles of the real people. And the actors worked alongside the person, the real person, to really come to terms with how this character should be portrayed in a very authentic way, and in a way that that sort of paid homage to the person who had experienced and was living with the brain injury. And this was incredibly profound experience for those actors. They all talked about how they had had an interest and maybe even had a family member who had had a stroke or who was living with a traumatic brain injury, but they hadn't ever stepped inside that person's experience. And how living through that character, both in the rehearsal process and then in the performance, gave them a tiny glimpse into what it is like to not be able to communicate clearly or be understood or walk. And so they had a completely new appreciation. And in fact, so 10 years ago, many of those actors are still in touch with and friends with the person that they portrayed because the bond that they forged was so strong. So how do actors do this? There's a little key that they have, and it's called the magic if. That was a fun graphic to come up with. I thought I was really clever with that one. So the dominant method of actor training in the West for the last 70 years has been the work of Konstantin Stanislavski, who was a Russian theater practitioner and who the founder of psychological realism and was working at the same time as Anton Chekhov. And to distill all of his work into one area, he asked actors to use the magic if. If I were, then I would. And it's a very simple statement, and you could fill in the if I were ... You could fill that in with hours and hours, right? So thinking about the character that I portrayed, Bob. If I were 45, if I had a stroke, if I could no longer work, if I, and on and on and on. So taking the essence, distilling the essence of yourself, you're not losing yourself at all, but you're taking yourself and you're putting it into an entirely different set of circumstances. It's a beautiful key. And then, of course, there's a woman who is one of the most famous acting teachers in the US, Uta Hagen, took Stanislavski's theories and designed these 6 beautiful questions that help us answer the magic if. And those questions are, who am I? And that can go on forever. I mean, if you think about yourself, who am I? Of course, you might have your name, but then you might also have your gender. You might have your religion. You might have your socioeconomic class, your education, your employment, your family, your birth date, what you ate for breakfast. We could go on and on and on. And that's actually what actors do. That is what we do. We write the background for all of these characters because the playwright doesn't provide it. And then what are the circumstances? So right now, the circumstances, if I were to say my circumstances, the immediate ones, I'm up in front of a group of people, I'm wearing heels that are slightly uncomfortable, got a lapel on, I'm at a university, it's March, it's night, it's cold, my daughter's home. Like, we could go on and on with the circumstances. And then what are my relationships? So what is feeding into that moment with people who are in that moment, but also relationships that exist outside of that moment? And then a lot of people call this the golden key. What do I want? And Stanislavski and Uta Hagen and a lot of psychologists would say we are motivated by what we want. Of course, there's always something in the way, otherwise we'd all be exactly where we want to be in the world, right? So what's in the way? And then this beautiful question, what am I willing to do to get what I want despite what's in my way? What am I willing to do? And sometimes it's very drastic measures. In a theater performance, it's often drastic measures because we don't present the boring parts of life. We only present the theatrical. So these are just some wonderful techniques. I like to look at this monologue, and I'll read it, but while I read it, I'd also kind of like you to read along, and then we're going to deal with the magic if and the 6 questions, and then I'd like you to read it out loud. And I picked this purposefully because just of the question of refugees that we're pondering right now. This is a monologue that I got. It's actually a monologue that a friend of one of my former students got. So I'll read it out loud and read along. My life in Iraq was good. I had the most important things, peace, stability, and safety. At first, I thought the war would end quickly. It was calm initially. I continued to work. In 2006, everything changed. The Shiite mosque in Samarra was bombed, and then the war broke out between the Sunni and the Shia. Before all this, all that was important was you were Iraqi. There was no divide. I never imagined something bad could happen. I learned I was a Shia. I learned I was living in a Shia region, which was dangerous because my family is Sunni. I didn't believe the threats until my son was kidnapped. Mustafa went to a teacher's house for tutoring one afternoon. I was afraid something had happened because he was very late. I called the teacher, who told me that as Mustafa left, men pulled up in a van and took him. He was gone for 10 days. He was tortured. They were taking revenge because my family was Sunni, because my husband was a translator, because I was a woman and had a job. This destroyed Mustafa. After this, we couldn't live in Iraq. My life now, miserable. I do not feel safe. I'm living with no goals. What do I have to live for? I am dying slowly. So when we read that, I mean, most of us are affected, but can you imagine if we went down the road of answering the questions, using the magic if and asking, this is a woman named Amira, who is 52 years old, and her son was 8 when he was kidnapped. So does that change things now that we have that piece of information? What are her circumstances? She's actually living in Cairo, and she doesn't want to be there because she sees the government also in decline, and she just wants to be somewhere who's safe. We also have the fact that we can add into it she's Sunni, and Saddam Hussein was Sunni, and she felt, under his regime, she felt peace. What does she want? She wants peace. She wants stability, and she wants safety. What's in her way? The world. The world. But money. She's left her home. She's left her house. She does not have a job. Her husband does not have a job. Her son is not old enough to work, and it's just the 3 of them living in Cairo. Actually, they live in 6 October City, which is a suburb of Giza. So what is she willing to do to get it? Which I think is really interesting. She says sort of in the end, not really much. She's sort of resigned to dying this slow death. But just in answering those questions, and if you are to put yourself in those shoes, of course, we're very, very lucky. And it's a hard thing to do, but if you ask yourself, if I were Amira, if I were 52, if my son had been kidnapped and I had to leave the country in order for him to feel okay, if I had to quit my job, if I had to leave my home that I owned, if I had to move to this other country that I didn't feel comfortable in, how would I feel? I have an assignment that I give students in any class that I can possibly fit it into. And that is where I ask them to choose someone in their life that they're very close to, but that they have a very difficult relationship with. Either because they disagree about a particular issue, or they just don't understand one another. And I ask them to go interview that person. So that person has to agree to an interview. And I ask them to record the interview, and then I ask them to transcribe the interview. And then I ask them to take the transcription back to the person that they interviewed, and I ask the two of them to pick out moments that are really strong for both of them. So often in interviews, someone will repeat something, even if it's a word or a phrase. But there's generally a theme or an area of interest that arises. And then I have them take out those moments that are very profound and to craft a monologue. And then to rehearse and perform that monologue using the magic if and the 6 questions. And sometimes they perform it for the person that they interviewed. And it has led to remarkable shifts in relationships. I've had students interview grandparents, parents, siblings, friends on every kind of issue, from gun legislation, most recently, and gun violence prevention, to sexuality, to religion. That's a very hot topic. And it generally has brought people together, and I would say that every one of my students has walked away from the experience going, I had no idea that's what they felt. And it's a very simple exercise. So I would challenge you to do the same thing, to go back thinking about ways to promote empathy in your everyday life, the use of your voice, not to conceal, but to express, the use of eye contact to make someone feel that they are safe with you and can communicate with you, facial expressions, body language, observing other people, and imagination. Removing your own judgment, which is very hard to do. I'm not saying that I do all of this stuff. Removing your own judgment, because in order to feel empathy for another person, you have to want to feel empathy for them. If you don't want to feel empathy for them, and you can't remove your own judgment, you won't feel it. So seek to relate to and identify with the person. And then use that simple key, the magic if and the 6 questions. Put yourself in the shoes of another person. It's a great exercise to try. And I often do this with people in my life who I have a difficult time understanding where they're coming from. And it may not answer all the problems, but it certainly gives me a moment to breathe and to think and to have a healthier, stronger relationship with them. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian. So we have some mics assembling around the room. Do we have any questions? One way back there, Angela. She's coming. Back on the front row, put up your hand again, would you please?
Oh,
Angela, do you see?
sorry, I thought it was right there.
Hi, thank
Hi.
you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
With empathy, it's a big thing with me, and I just wanted to go back to the refugee thing, is that, you know, we've known for a long time that people were drowning, trying to make the trip between Turkey and Greece, and and I'm sure we all had empathy for it, but the magic bullet there was when the little boy washed up on the shore, and that really spurred an amazing reaction. So while we don't like bad things happening, sometimes it takes something terrible to bring that out. But when it does come out, it's very strong.
And certainly that image, which was broadcast in so many different places. I mean, we'd heard stories, but we'd heard them, and seeing that image. And I think because that image, when I think back to that image, there's movement in that image, and so the story unfolds. I mean, we see the boat in the image, we see the child, we see the movement of waves, even though we don't see the movement, it's implied in there, and we see all of the people on the shore, and so there's that story. And so I think that part of the reason it was, well, and it's a child, but part of it is the story behind it that was so clearly brought forward, that connected and shocked us out of choosing not to be affected to feeling empathetic. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I have an observation and a comment, not so much a question.
Great.
I have a young friend who is on the Asperger's spectrum, and throughout his life has had trouble coping and behaving. But his parents put him in MCT since he was practically able to walk. When he was a high school senior, he did a senior project, and he talked about how his acting experience had given him the tools to behave correctly. And because he identified himself as an actor, when he felt the impulse to act out, he became the character of the correctly behaving person.
Yeah.
And that's the power of acting. When people say it's entertainment, it's more than that.
Thank
So I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you. I have a quick response, and that is, well, a couple different. One is that studies in autism and Asperger's are looking at mirror neurons and whether there are less of a subset, or maybe those neurons are not firing. And so a person with autism or Asperger's or somewhere on that spectrum is maybe not feeling that corollary feeling. And there's actually a lot of work in drama specifically designed for people on that spectrum to teach them how to mimic those facial expressions, to show other people that they're feeling when in fact they might not be, but it makes the relationship stronger, definitely. Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that.
I have a question about the training that you give acting students in how to step back if they're over empathizing. For lay people, how can they learn how to do that so that they don't get sucked in too far and can't really be helpful?
Mm-hmm. Well, we always have a ritual. So before we go into portraying a character, it's not just jumping into the character. There's always some ritual that generally involves changing of one's physicality. A lot of times when we're in a production, it's the very act of putting on a costume, which can be incredible. But I would say for someone who's not in a production, even a simple removal of an article of clothing, a watch, an adjustment of one's hair, a fixing of the clothing, that's incredibly huge. Breath is really important, so we work with actors on breath control and breath support, and in pulling in that character or that empathy and then letting it go. And it seems like maybe okay, what does that do? But actually that professional actors who take on, sometimes incredibly emotional roles for a year, if they're lucky. If an actor's lucky and they're, in a production, they could be doing it for several months. And they're doing it night after night. And so breath and changing of appearance is huge. And also just taking the time. We always ask actors to step back out of the moment. Usually we ask them to turn away so they're just alone and to think about it. We do some other physical things as well that are a little more complicated. But also just breathing in the self and one's own place in the world and breathing out the emotions of that other. There's a lot of people who say that empathy is not a good thing. And there is a difference between emotional empathy and cognitive empathy. And one of the things that really, which I didn't get into at all, but one of the things that really interests me is that acting, I think, asks people to do both. It asks us to feel things, but it asks us to rationalize and to give a background and to give a context to those feelings so that we're not trapped in that feeling and we don't know what to do. And so having the ability to look at it from someone else's perspective, but to understand the full context and then to resume one's own context is really important. It's a great question.
My question was that question.
Awesome. It's a good question. I wish the students would ask it more. Because sometimes they get in trouble, and then we have to help them figure that out.
The rep here just did All My Sons, and I found it hugely powerful. And I went several times and brought people, but it didn't sell, and it didn't sell around the country because it's depressing, it's dark. Can you address that, please?
Yeah, people still want to go see theater for entertainment. And All My Sons is an interesting play. It's a well-made play written in a tradition that usually has a more positive ending. And it has an awful, awful ending. It ends with a suicide. And then the play's over. And people there's a reason why catharsis, in the Greek sense of the term, is so craved by spectators. Because we want to feel all of those things, and then we want to purge those things and resume our wonderful, happy life and go on our way. And when we see something that's very disturbing like that, we don't get to purge. We go right there, and we feel it, and we have to walk out like this. And people just don't like that. And it's too bad, because I mean, there's many people. I didn't even get into my whole discussion of my favorite theater practitioner in the world, Augusto Boal. But Augusto Boal and Brecht and Artaud, many others would say that it's not when you take an audience to the point where they're really feeling something and then you allow them to get rid of that feeling, to purge it and to go back and feel satiated, then they are less likely to change. They're less likely to think about the issue and to let it affect their lives and then do anything about it. So I think that's why, Sandy.
That was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
It had me thinking about our current political climate.
Oh, God.
And without the empathy and the judgment and the name, all of this, and it's a hot topic and all. But I'd like your comments on that, or how you would change things. Or
well, I think
what.
that's one of the reasons that I wanted to bring up. In order to really have empathy be effective, you have to want to remove your own judgment, and you have to want to feel, and you have to want to experience that other perspective. And I think that's my 2 cents on the problem. Many people don't want to remove their own judgment. It's all about judgment. And I think especially when people are campaigning, there's no way they can have empathy for anybody, or they'll completely lose all of the masses. But yeah, I thought about that a lot because I knew that question would come up. And I think that's why. I think the key is being able to remove your own judgment. And that's a really hard thing to do. And very often, actors are afraid to play the villain. because in order to play a successful villain, they cannot see the villain as the villain, because most people don't see themselves as a villain. Who sees themselves as a villain? Everyone's doing the right thing, for the most part, except psychopaths. We're all trying and doing the right thing, and so when you're playing someone that's that kind of difficult or committing a horrendous act, you have to see the humanity in that person, and you have to see that person as someone who just wants something, and something's in their way, and they're going to do whatever it takes. It's the last three. What do I want? I want to get elected. What's in my way? What am I willing to do to get what I want? So, yeah, I don't know if it would work in the political arena. It would be really nice. Right, exactly. Or make others stand like that.
I think it also helps with empathy. I mean, we also see the other side lacking empathy, but I think it's also helpful for us to have empathy for why might they think that, or why are they,
Yeah.
what makes them
Yeah,
lose
that's a good
that
point.
desire.
Yeah. It's a great point.
It's more of a comment than a question, I guess.
That's fine.
Thanks so much, Jillian.
Thanks,
This was
Ashby.
great. I have a weird question.
Good.
We talk about empathy largely in terms of negative emotions. And I guess it's easy to, I guess I don't think it's that easy to feel joy for another person. And I think some of the judgment questions intervene in that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any research in kind of work in that, and that sort of in the way the positive or affirmative empathy
Yes.
plays itself out?
Definitely. And that ties back to your question about how you can deal with, going somewhere for someone and then getting out. The opposite can be done to find an experience in your life that has brought joy to you. And it brings us back to those facial expressions of Paul Ekman. I mean, a lot of the work that I've done has been with people who have survived traumatic and acquired brain injuries and who are in a very, very difficult place in their life. Most of the people I work with can't live at home again, and they cannot be independent. They cannot resume the life that they had. And so what I do is I work with them to figure out who they want to become. They're reinventing themselves, and to use whatever physical abilities they have and facial expressions to feed into positive emotions, because there have been studies shown that it's the concept of self-efficacy too. If I feel that I can be successful in this, happiness, I am more likely to be. So yeah, there's a lot of work in that, and it's, I think, really powerful.
Just on a light note, I guess.
Good.
Since things are so dark and dreary, do you think there'll be a resurgence in musical comedy?
Ooh. There always is. There's always a resurgence in musical comedy. And I can't tell you what we're doing next year in terms of musical comedy, but it's a good one. It's a good one. Yes, and I think that's why people want to go see musical comedy, because it's totally uplifting, and it's fun, and so you leave feeling really great, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's a really wonderful thing to do. And I think a lot of the work that I've done with non-actors is about finding that positivity and using facial expressions and body language and character to express joy and happiness and all of the positive. And it really does change somebody's life when they feel better. They treat others better.
Anybody else? Well, if not, let's give Professor Campbell.
Yeah, thank you.